I have learned that if something don't make sense to you, it makes sense to God. Amen. And you should trust Him. You do understand that? That makes sense? That makes sense, right? Yes. Isaiah 65, verse 24, thereabout, it says, if I'm right, it says, there's going to come a time of blessing. And he says, before you call, I will answer. Do you get that? And while you're speaking, I will hear. What that suggests to me is that before you call, it suggests that whatever it is that you will be calling on God for, before you call, whatever the situation that's going to make you call on the Lord, before you call, God has already put things in place. Are you following me? God has already put things in place to take care and prepare for your call. So now while you're speaking, He hears. But He has already acted on your behalf. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so this morning in the message, I'm going to apologize from now because this message will take me 50 minutes to an hour. Okay? So I apologize from now. I don't want anyone sleeping or yawning on me because I'm going to wake you up. All right? I want to share with you this morning proof that God put things in place in preparation for your moment of crisis. So when you speak to Him, the only thing you have to do is trust Him that He's already taken care of it. If you turn with me to the book of Esther, you'll find the book of Esther is just before Job, which is just before Psalms. And we're going to look through this book of Esther and find the comfort that I have found. Now, the book of Esther begins with an extravagant banquet. In fact, if you read it all the way down, perhaps to maybe verse 8, it's extravagant beyond extravagance. It was a celebration. It was Xerxes' moment of celebrating. We're not sure what he was celebrating. We're not sure if there was a great victory and he came back and he was celebrating, or whether he was trying to boost the morale of his troops because he was facing, certain defeats. We don't know, but it was 3 years into his reign when he had this celebration. If it was because the time of the Persian was waning, remember in Daniel chapter 2, it says that after Babylon would be the Persians, right? The Medes and the Persians. And then it says, after the Medes and Persians would be the Greeks. So maybe at this time, the Greeks and their city-states and their leaders were getting strong. You all remember the film and the story of the 300, where at Thermopylae, 300 Greeks, Spartans, 300 at Thermopylae, they stood in the gap between the Persian army, which was numbered over 90,000. 300 against 90,000. And they stood in the gap between the Persian army and Athens, the Greek, one of the Greek states. And all of the Persians died there, but they gave Athens time to prepare for the invasion. In fact, the person from Thermopylae, a place there called Marathon, he ran 26 miles to Athens to warn him that the Persians were coming. And he dropped and died at the end of the 26 miles. So guess what we have today? The marathon. And how long is the marathon? 26. That's where it came from. That's where it came from. So the Greeks were probably on the rise, and Xerxes needed to encourage his troops. So he had this big celebration. In fact, the Bible said they could drink as much as they want. Wine flowed like water in the citadel of Susa that day. The soldiers, every soldier were drinking out of golden cups. And not just, Mary Lou, not just golden cups, but it says every cup was different from the other. Huh? I'm trying to paint a picture of opulence, of celebration. The king was happy. He was it was a joyous time for him with his soldiers. So after the 6 months of celebration, he had an extra 7 days just for close, commanders and lieutenants and chiefs and so forth. He just set for 7 days. Now, during this time when wine was flowing, the king got excited about his wife, Vashti. Uh-oh. And he said to his eunuchs, go and tell Vashti I want to see her. And she must wear her best dress and her crown, because I want my soldiers to look at her, because she was very beautiful. He wanted to show her, to show her off. And for the first time, I believe in biblical history, we have a little bit of woman's lib. Because Vashti said, I'm not coming. I'm not going to be paraded for men to look at me. I don't believe really that's what she said. I believe she actually said, because the text said, while the king was looking after the men, she was what? Entertaining the women. So I think all she said was, tell your majesty, I'll be there soon. I think that's all she said. But these men, they've never heard that in the history of the Persian Empire. That somebody would say to the king, wait a minute. Because the word of the Persian king is law. Whatever he says must be done immediately. So these men went back, and they were a bit miserable, and they went and they complained to the king that Vashti says she's not coming, and the king was angry. But we know by the time we finish in chapter 1, we know why the men did this. The men thought that if the queen, if the first lady could get away with saying to the king, wait a minute, or I'm not coming right now, they said, what will our wives say to us when we try to tell them what to do? They won't listen to us. So they made this case to the king, and they said to the king, you've got to get rid of Vashti. Now that's the first thing I want you to remember here. Vashti was queen for no reason at all. The king got rid of Vashti. In chapter 2, the king was sad because he loved Vashti and he missed her. So he was sad, moping around the place like someone who've lost their date, their first date in college or university, moping around. So his men said to him, why are you moping around sad like this? This is what you must do. We need to find a queen to replace Vashti. So this is what I'm instructing you to do. I'm suggesting that you do. Have a beauty pageant. Get all the most beautiful women in your province, all 27 provinces, and bring them for a Miss Universe contest. Are you awake? Who's sleeping? Who's sleeping? Someone is sleeping here? So we're going to have this Miss Universe pageant, and then you can choose a new queen out of this pageant. So that this pleased the king, And so they sent out the word that we're going to have a beauty pageant, for someone to be queen. And the word went out, and it came to the attention of a man by the name of Mordecai. Now, Mordecai, the Bible said, had a niece by the name of Hadassah, or we know her as Esther. Probably was about 17 years old, something like that, or around about that. And he was taking care of her because she had lost her mother and father. Now, I want you to understand this first. Queen Vashti out of the way. Here, Mordecai was a Jew, and he had this beautiful Jewish girl named Esther, or Hadassah. And he said to this 17-year-old Jewish virgin, I want you to go and enter this beauty contest to join the king's harem, because he's looking for a queen. This is strange for a Jewish person to do, to set up this beautiful girl to become, a concubine or a queen to a heathen king. Well, that's what he did. And Esther, who is obedient, she decided, she agreed with her husband because she was a good girl, with Mordecai because she was a good girl, and she joined the pageant. And guess what? Out of the pageant, Esther was such a good, wonderful girl that she linked herself with the eunuch that was looking after all these women, and she listened to everything he said. And when it was her turn to go and see the king, she didn't make a choice herself. She thought to herself, and young ladies, you need to think like this. She thought to herself, this person is more experienced. He knows what the king likes. So whatever he says to wear, I'm going to wear. And so she did, and she went to the king, and out of all the women that came before the king, he chose Esther. He chose Hadassah. And the Bible says in chapter 2 that she became queen in the place of Vashti. So remember that. Vashti out of the way. Esther, Mordecai, make Esther join this beauty pageant. Esther now become queen in place of Vashti. Now chapter 2 ends in an interesting way. Remember, we're only at chapter 2. Vashti is already out of the way. Mordecai is in the picture with Esther. Esther has become queen. Now something interesting happened by the end of chapter 2. Mordecai, who was in the king's gates, discovered. Now this is interesting to me because it wasn't the CIA, it wasn't the NSA, it wasn't the army, the navy, it wasn't of the intelligence services, but this one man, Mordecai, sitting in the king's gate, discovered that there was an assassination plot to kill the king. This one man. What I'm trying to show you, brothers and sisters, is how God is putting everything in place to prepare for a crisis. So Mordecai told Esther, because, if Esther would bring this information to the king, then she might be kind of a special, because there's a lot of women, and she would have a special place. So he said, go and tell the king. But Esther, the Bible says, ending of chapter 2, that Esther reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. In whose name? So Mordecai is recorded, it says in the last verse of chapter 2, is recorded in the diary of the king that Mordecai spared his life. And guess what the king did for Mordecai? Nothing. Nothing. If I spare Donald Trump's life, I want to ride in that limousine. I want to be able to walk in the White House whenever I please. My retirement will be at Mar-a-Lago. I want everything. But Mordecai spared the king's life, and it would have been tradition back then that he would be honored. But it says nothing. He simply wrote it in a diary. And chapter 2 finishes. Chapter 3 came and da-da-da-da. The villain arrives on the scene. Chapter 3 says that Haman was promoted to highest in the land, barring the king. Haman, this Agagite, was promoted. But God has already, in chapter 1 and chapter 2, been busy putting things in place, preparing for this. Chapter 1 and chapter 2. And then in chapter 3, the devil now makes his attack. Not knowing that God has already put things in place. So the devil made his attack. Haman is promoted. And Haman, you know, this proud, this selfish, this egomaniac, you know, as he came out of the coronation of him being the highest in the land and everybody bowing to him. One man didn't bow to him. He didn't even notice because everybody was bowing, but Mordecai didn't bow to him. Mordecai knew his heritage. Mordecai knew his lineage. Mordecai remembered from way back in Samuel when King Saul was supposed to have killed all the Amalekites, but he spared King Agag. Mordecai knew the history. And Mordecai wouldn't bow to this man. So they told Mordecai, they keep asking, Mordecai, why won't you bow? So they told Haman that Mordecai wouldn't bow. And Mordecai got mad. And he was coming out of the palace one day and he saw it for himself that Mordecai wasn't bowing. So he inquired, who is this man? Who is this infidel? Who is this nothing that dare not to bow to me? And they told him it's Mordecai, and that Mordecai is a Jew. He's a Jew? And I don't know if Haman could also remember the history of the Amalekites and his family line, Agag, with the Jews. But he got so mad that he decided, I'm not only going to destroy this man, Mordecai, but I'm going to destroy all of his race. What this means, you see, brothers and sisters, what was happening here is the devil was using this opportunity to wipe out all the lineage by which Jesus would be born. Trying to wipe them out so that God would not have a savior. We would not have a savior. We would not have a Messiah. We would not have an Emmanuel, God with us. He tried to wipe it out, to put an end within this great controversy. But God, I wish you could get excited with me, had already put things in place to deal with this. So by the time Haman went to the king and persuaded the king to that these people, it's a little bit probably like in Jordan, the kingdom of Jordan right now, there are probably more people who are not Jordanians. Jordanians. And there are, Jordanians. Refugees that has come to Jordan. It is like that. And somebody say to the king of Jordan, these people are not your friend. They're harboring ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all kinds of people. So Haman made his pitch to the king, and the king believed him. And the king agreed to send letters. He even gave Haman his signet ring to say that this is from the king. And once the king says something and that signet ring is on it, the law of the Medes and Persian means it cannot be changed. Not even the king can change his own law. Thank God for democracy. Not even the king. And letters were sent out everywhere that on a certain month, on a certain day, at a certain time, the Persians were to rise up and they were to kill all the Jews in their town, in their villages, in their community. And Mordecai in Susa heard about this because he saw one of the letters that the UPS was taken everywhere. He saw one of the letters and he went into mourning and crying and fasting and praying. And chapter 3 ends. Misery in Susa, confusion. But Haman and the king was having tea together. Chapter 4, Mordecai sent message to Esther, because he's always outside the gate, always looking out for his little niece, trying to make sure she's okay. And he sent message to Esther about what the king and Haman had planned to do for the Jews. By the way, here's one other thing that I didn't point out in the preparation. Esther did not tell the king or anybody that she was a Jew. No one knew that she was a Jew. That's very important to God working out his purpose. And so he sent to Esther and said, this is what's happening. So I want you to go to the king and beg for the life of your people. Esther sent back a message quickly. Uncle Mordecai, cousin Mordecai, you know that it's illegal, it's against the law for anybody to go to the king when they're not invited. And he hasn't invited me for a month. And if I go to the king uninvited, I could lose my life. And Mordecai sent back, as we had in our text, sent back to her in typical Jewish fashion. So you think you will be safe in the palace while we out here are dying? No. Deliverance will come from somewhere. And you, along with the others, will die. You see, the book of Esther is one of those books that never mention God. And it never mention prayer or anything like that. But here's the closest we get. Because Esther sent back to Mordecai and says, gather the people in Susa, and I want you to go in fasting for 3 days. So that must include prayer, right? To go in fasting for 3 days and plead. And after the 3 days, I will go into the king, and if I perish, I perish. Sometimes, young people, that's how we have to stand for our principles. It might cost us something, but we're going to stand for our godly principles. And that's how chapter 4 ends, with fasting. In chapter 5, Esther plucked up the courage to go to the king. She remembered what the commander, the eunuch, the commander of the women, she remembered his counsel and how she should dress. She was dressing to seduce. And chapter 5 said she put on her clothes and she went in front of the king's chamber where his throne room was. And she just, not paying attention to the king. I said, just looking around. The doors were open, not looking around, just. And she was very sensually dressed, as only Esther and know how. And she was just looking, oh, that's beautiful, never seen. And just wandered past the door. And the king saw her. And the moment the king saw her, the Bible said, oh, he remembered her, and he remembered the love and the passion he had for her. So he extended the scepter. Said, come, my queen. And she touched the scepter, and he says, what is it? Because he realized there must be something. For Esther to put her life on the line like this, there must be something. So he said, my dear, my beauty, my sweet, what is your request? Whatever it is. Now, most guys will understand this part. Because when you're in love with somebody, your first love, and you're dating your first love, you always make stupid promises. Promises that you can't keep. I remember when I was dating my wife, we used to get weekly wage. I used my entire wage to buy her a dress. Crazy. Can't pay your bills. Now is the time to admit it. Crazy. We say and we do crazy. We would spend money that we don't have to buy ring, to buy frivolous things. So the king said, my love, my beauty, what is your desire? What is your request? I will give it to you even to half of my kingdom. You would give me half of it? Xerxes, your majesty, you would give me half of your kingdom. Come on. So Esther, being wise, being well schooled by Mordecai, being well schooled by listening, by following the instruction of those who were more experienced than her, she said, Your Majesty, this is my desire. I would like you to come to a banquet that I've prepared for you. Now listen, you must understand this. I see time is running on me. You must understand this. Esther must have prepared the banquet in advance. So she said, I would like you to come to a banquet that I have prepared. And I would like you to bring Haman as well to the banquet. The king got so excited. I don't know why. Maybe he was thinking about later on after the banquet. But he got so excited. He hurried. He says, hurry, bring Haman. We're going to a banquet with the queen. And they went to the banquet with the queen. Now, I want you to understand how Haman must feel. Because this is a private event. This is booking a room at the Ritz. And only the king and Haman were invited to this banquet. Can you imagine his head? Can you imagine his joy? And Haman went to the banquet, and oh my, the banquet was good. The food was good. The wine was good. Everything was nice. And the king just caught himself and says, Esther, my love, my darling, my baby, what is it you want? And just tell me and I will give it to you, even half of my kingdom. Come on, Xerxes. You would give me half of your... No, she said, no. I'm going to prepare another banquet. And I would like you and Haman to come to this second banquet. Then I will tell you my heart's desire. Whoop-de-doo. Huh? Haman went home, but on his way out of the gate, guess who he saw? Mordecai, not bowing. And he went home, and his family came by, and he was sharing with them how, I'm going to say God, but no, I can't. No. He's going to say how fortune were blessing him. Oh, I've been elevated to highest in the land. All my children, everything is just great. I've been invited to a banquet, just me, with the queen and the king. And not just that, but I've been invited again, just me and the king. But he said, this is why I try to preach so much about hatred, because hatred can destroy you. He said, all of that don't mean much to me when I see that Mordecai. That's what hatred can do for you. You come to church and because someone has hurt you, you miss out on the entire blessing of God during the service. Because the person who hurt you just walked in the church. Or the person that hurt you is preaching from the pulpit. You miss out on all of that. Mordecai and Haman says, all of this means nothing to me when I see Mordecai. So his wife, came up with, hey, Zeresh came up with a great idea. Well, tell me something. Haman, my husband, aren't you number one? Aren't you next to the king? Yes. Build a gallows. Just go to the king and ask to hang Mordecai on the gallows. Simple as that. And get rid of this man, and then you'll be free to enjoy your prosperity. That's what happened to hatred. It causes you to devise evil, to devise vile things, because it just builds up inside of you. And if you weren't a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, you would put poison in that person's food. Be careful with potluck. No, sorry. No, but this evil to kill somebody just because they're annoying you, just because you hate them. Well, it wasn't a surprise for Haman because he already planned to kill all the Jews on a particular day, of a particular month. And this pleased him, and chapter 5 ends with Haman planning to go to the king to ask for the head to hang Mordecai on a gallows which was being built and constructed that day for Mordecai. I want you to remember this. Haman was going to the king now after having a gallows built to hang Mordecai on it. But chapter 6 opens. And guess what chapter 6 opens? The king could not sleep. All night the king was restless. Oh, brothers and sisters, someone might be plotting evil against you. But you need to remember that God does not slumber and God does not sleep. The king was agitated all night. He couldn't sleep. So he asked his secretaries to bring the diary, the register of the king's activities, and to read it to him. Haman had built a gallows. He was going to the palace to ask the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows the next morning. But the king couldn't sleep. And they were reading for him the recordings in the diary of the king. The secretary was reading, and the Bible said, in the morning, that early morning, as Haman was leaving his house and going towards the palace, that early morning, they came across the spot where it is written that Mordecai saved the king's life. Haman was on the way to the palace to ask to hang Mordecai on the gallows which he had built. At that very moment, as Mordecai was walking up the steps of the palace, they were reading to the king that Mordecai had saved the king's life. Mordecai reached the top of the steps, and he's now entering into the pavilion or the foyer of the palace. I don't remember what it's called, of the palace. And the king said to his secretaries, tell me, hallelujah, what did we do for Mordecai who saved my life? I wish you would all with me, because you would all just answer nothing. What did we do for Mordecai who saved the king's life? The secretary said, nothing. At that moment, Haman entered the palace. And the king said, who is in the palace? And the secretary said, oh, your majesty, your top man, your number one man, your numero uno man, Haman has just entered the palace. And the king says, bring him here. Haman came before the king. And the king looked at Haman, and the king was excited, sitting up in his bed. And the king said, Haman, what should the king do to someone he wants to honor? Huh? What should the king do? Remember, if you're forgetting, God had put this in place in chapter 2 before the crisis even come. And he wasn't, but I'm just saying me. You know, Mordecai was there. I saved the king's life and did nothing. I got nothing. I'm still just here. Nothing. You know what I mean? The king said, what should we do? What should be done for the man that the king desires to honor? Now, I can sympathize with Haman at this point, because everything has been on the up and up. So, who could the king want to honor? And if you were with me, you would be like John here, you would answer. You know, so he said, you know, who could the king possibly want to honor except moi? It must be me. Everything has been... I think it's Tony that said, when things are going great, that's when he worries. But if he has problems, it's when he trusts God and know that God is in it. So Haman, things are going great. And here is an example of why, when things are going good, always think, this is too good to be true. Here's why. Because Haman now, because he concluded that it couldn't be anybody else that the king wanted to honor. Oh, he made me number one. I went to Banquet, you know, and I'm going to Banquet again. You know, so Haman saw a blank check, and he was going to fill in the zeros. Oh, Your Majesty, you need to get your crown. Not just the everyday crown, but this got to be the special crown. That's the coronation crown. This has got to be the crown that people know. And you got to put it on his head. You got to get a robe. Not just any robe, but the royal robe. And put it over him. Haman was writing his own salary. And then you want to get a horse. Not just any horse, but the royal horse. And you want to put the man on top of the horse. And here is the bit now. Here's the bit now. Here is the egocentric, you know, selfish, yeah. He says, get one of your princes to lead him around Susa, shouting, this is the man the king wants to honor. And Haman could only picture himself with the crown, with the robe on the king's horse, and someone leading him. Can you see that head of his? And the king was so excited with what Haman had proposed. The king jumped up, and the king said, Haman, I want you to do everything that you just said. Leave nothing out. I want you to do that. Yeah. I want you to do it to Mordecai. Haman came to the palace to ask to hang Mordecai on the gallows he had built. And this is where God says, pride cometh before a fall. Haman had to take the lead on that donkey, that horse. with Mordecai sitting on the king's robe, crown, and lead Mordecai around the city of Susa. Can you imagine his friends? Can you imagine those who were saying, Haman, Mordecai didn't bow? Can you imagine? I'm sure someone had a heart attack. Haman, the highest in the land, leading Mordecai, the lowest at the gate. This is what the Lord. The Bible said that when he finished, went back to the palace. Haman rushed home in humiliation. He had to wear the crown of shame. And in distress, he went home. His family were there. And he told them all the calamities that had happened to him. And they were all, and it is now that his wife, Zeresh, she didn't think about that before. She said, was that Mordecai a Jew? Yeah. Oh, you shouldn't mess with the Jews. Yeah, a bit late, Zeresh. So in the midst of this confusion, I want you to picture this. And it's very important that you picture this. In the midst of this confusion, Mordecai is humiliated. His family trying to console him. He can't understand what has happened to him. He just don't, and he's talking and they're talking and he's sweating and he's stressed and he's tense. And in the midst of that confusion, chapter 6 ends saying that the chariot from the palace came to pick him up, to take him to the banquet. Didn't have time to change, to fix himself. So what does it mean to imagine this? There is Haman in this confusion, thinking what had befallen him. But there is a little bright spark in all of this. Because all of this happened, but I'm still the only one going to the banquet with the king and Queen Esther. So he had a little optimism. There's a little hope in his heart that all is not lost. I am still going to the banquet. Just me with Esther and the king. And in that thought in his mind, they galloped him to the palace to where the banquet was. And there they were, chapter 7 in the banquet. Haman trying to put what happened earlier behind him and to enjoy this semblance of success still. And he was drinking, the king was drinking, and then the king made those proverbial statements for the third time. My darling, my queen, my sweet, my honey, tell me what it is that I can do for you. And I will do it even to the half of my kingdom. Really, Xerxes, you're going to give me half of your kingdom. To half of my kingdom. And Esther began to relay the story of the plot to destroy the Jews. And she said, Your Majesty, I wouldn't even bring this up to you if it was just about me. Because she already decided if I perish, I perish. She said, I wouldn't bring this up if it was just about me. But it's about my people. It's about thousands of women and children and men that are going to be slaughtered on this particular day of this particular month. That's why I'm bringing it up, Your Majesty. And, Your Majesty, these are my people. Because remember in chapter 2, she did not say that she was a Jew. So the king was hearing this for the first time, that she was a Jew. Which means that he had signed an edict to kill his wife, Esther. And the Bible said the king was enraged. Who? No, you got to be Haman here. And imagine Haman sitting, drinking his wine and listening to this and knowing, this sounds familiar. Yeah, this sounds familiar. And if he was white, he would be gray. And if he was black, he would look the same. Anyway, so Esther relayed to the king. The king was so angry. The king says, who is this man? Who dare to threaten the life of my queen? Who is this man? Now, what you need to imagine, Haman. Does she know it's me? Did I cover my tracks? And Esther, in the strongest voice that she could, that's how it's read. When you read it, it's like that. She said, it is this evil Haman that has done it and has planned this. Now, I don't know what's happening to Haman at this stage, but I'm sure he's on the floor somewhere. But the king, I want you to understand this. The king, hearing for the first time that Haman, his trusted, loyal servant, highest in the land, that Haman would plan to. No, he didn't know who to believe. Do I believe Esther? Or do I believe Haman? Because Haman is probably saying, no, she's lying, Your Majesty. He didn't know what to believe. So the Bible says, in that rage and that confusion, the king stepped out of the room, stepped onto his balcony, contemplating the magnitude of what he just heard, of who he will believe. And I don't know if, while he was out there, he thought to himself, maybe Esther got it wrong. But I do know that while he was out there, Haman, as I would be doing, began to beg Queen Esther for mercy. Began to beg her for help. Now in the process of begging her for help, and she was standing by a couch, he was begging her for help, she fell back because he was in her face. She fell back on the couch like this, and Haman came, no, please. In Jamaica we would say, beg for me. You don't know what beg for me means. You know what I mean. Yeah, please, talk to the king on my behalf. Because Haman could see that the king was angry. So he was over Queen Esther like this. Please, beg for me. She was down there, he was over her. And immediately the king came in and saw Haman over his wife. And it was settled for the king. He said, even in my house, you would assault my wife. And he said, arrest him. Put him to death. And one of his secretaries says, Your Majesty, Haman, had built a gallows in his backyard about yay high. And the king in his rage, he just says, hang him on it. And they took Haman away to hang him on his own gallows. Be careful when you decide to do harm to the innocent or to God's children. You might not be hanged on the gallows in this life, but you're certainly going to face it one day. Be careful. And you, God's children, you don't need to, well, yes, of course, because we're human beings. In your distress, in your crying, in your confusion, remember that if it doesn't make sense to you, it makes sense to God. What happened to Vashti? What happened to Mordecai in chapter 1 and 2? Didn't make sense to any of them, but it made sense to God. Chapter 8, they couldn't, go against, the king couldn't withdraw his order, so they had to supplement letters on top of that order, telling the Jews to defend themselves on this particular day, at this particular time. And so letters were written and were sent out everywhere, and the Jews at that particular day, when the day came for them to be slaughtered, the tide turned on the Jews, on the Persians, and they, the Jews, slaughtered their enemies. There was something good out of this. As you come towards the end of chapter 8, there's something good out of this. It says that many people became Jews for fear of the Jews. Huh? Many people, just like leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, many people joined that. Just like the death of the firstborn, many people went into the homes of the Jews, of the Israelites. Many people became Jews for fear of the Jews. And in chapter 9, Mordecai and Esther made plans to celebrate this great victory. And what to celebrate today, called the Festival of Lights in the Jewish calendar, to celebrate Purim. Yeah, the idea of you hear it celebrating twice is because, there were more people to be killed in Susa than in the provinces, so they needed an extra day. So outside they celebrated, and then the next day they celebrated for Susa. And all that Mordecai had was given, all that Haman had was given to Mordecai. And in chapter 10, in the last verse of chapter 10, Mordecai was numero uno, number one, in a Persian empire, like Daniel and the others. I'm done. I'm hoping that this message would give you some hope in your moment of crisis. If it doesn't make sense to you, remember, it makes sense to God. Trust Him. Amen.